Good afternoon, delegates. Just a 5-minute warning. We'll start in 5 minutes' time. You can kindly make your way into the hall. Thank you very much. Okay, delegates, we're ready for our afternoon session. We're going to start with a video. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, conference, and welcome back. Before we get started with motion number 5, which is addictions policy, to be proposed by Eva Comrie and seconded by Leanne Turvitt, just a couple of mentions. First of all, is the Curry Cayley tickets are on sale outside. Please do join us this evening because we'll be vacating the hall after the session on the Stone of Destiny, which I'll come to in a minute. So if you don't have a ticket for tonight, you can't stay for a drink afterwards. So there's a wee bit of encouragement, I hope. If you're looking to speak this afternoon, just to help our stewards, because it's quite difficult, could I possibly trouble you to raise your card so the stewards know where to come and get it from you, to see if you're trying to find them and them trying to find you. And on that note, we've had a really interesting topical resolution in which we'll hear later on, which has been accepted, so those of you may wish to speak on it, and it's about free speech, i.e. those who attempted to exercise the right to free speech during Her Majesty the late Queen's funeral and were prevented from doing so. So I think that might attract a number of speakers, so please get your cards in. At the end of this session, which is busy and includes award winners amongst you activists, and indeed an honorary membership to be bestowed upon somebody, we're going to have a tribute to the late Ian Hamilton, KC. And we're going to do that by, first of all, having a rendition of Flower of Scotland played on the pipes by Elaine Mitchell, followed by a discussion on the Stone of Destiny with Alex Salmond and author Andrew Neil MacLeod, who's written a book on the Stone of Destiny. So at close of proceedings, after our Deputy Leader's speech, I hope you'll stay behind for that 1-hour session and we can pay our respects and tribute to a late, great man. Thank you very much indeed, conference. Moving on now, motion number 5, addictions policy, to be proposed by Eva Comrie and seconded by Leanne Turvitt. Welcome to the wonderful Eva Comrie. Eva, of course, I've no doubt just finished a fringe. You're a trooper, so you are. Welcome, Matt. Welcome, Eva. Thanks, Eva.
Thank you. Now, Madam Chair, conference, and our Scottish audience worldwide. Our country stands at a pivotal moment, but in the searing words of Christy Moore, my soul is in the mountains, my heart is in the land. And at times there is a quiet desperation coming over me. I doubt very much whether there are many people in this room, or many homes, or many families in our great country who has not been touched by the hideous ravages of the hand of addiction. And in moving this motion, I pay very, very special tribute to several individuals, some of whom, out of respect for their positions, I cannot name, but I hope that they know who they are. Others I will name include the courageous Anne-Marie Ward from Favour UK, her colleague Dougie McMillan, who is an Alba member, and the magnificent James Doherty. If you've not seen a podcast that we did with Indie Scot News about addictions, I urge you to watch it. It was a very major learning experience for me to speak to these people who work in the recovery community. Now, last year, 1,330 people lost their lives to drug misuse in Scotland. But people in the most deprived areas were 15 times as likely to die a drug-related death than those in the least deprived. 15 times. Not 15%, 15 times. 1,245 Scots died through alcohol-related causes last year. 5.6 times more likely in the most deprived than in the least deprived. And 753 souls took their own lives. 3 times more in the most deprived than in the least deprived. And life expectancy in Scotland is reducing, and what we know in this land of plenty in 2022 is that poverty kills. But the numbers that I've quoted to you, we see in headlines on only a handful of occasions each year, when there is public wringing of hands by politicians and promises and undertakings by SARS and others to do better. So let us in Alba prove that we are the party and we are the people who actually listen to those, such as my friend James, who was able, with proper medical attention and rehabilitation, to recover from childhood trauma, periods in prison, and to become a dad, a friend, and a supporter of many. I listened to him say, and I've watched this part of the video over and over again, he was in rehab and he said to one of the men who was working with him, "But you don't know what it's like to be me. You don't know what it's like to be me." But of course, the recovery worker went on to explain to James that yes, he did. I want, and I hope that everybody in our party wants, the whole of Scotland to understand what addiction is and to do our utmost to root out the causes and the effects without delay and without weasel words and empty promises. We know that with independence and control of all of our resources, we will have the ability then to attack poverty and inequality radically, and to attack the deprivation which this union has imposed upon our country and our people for centuries. But until we're an independent country, we have got to treat each and every one of our citizens, each and every one, with dignity and respect, and we must understand and teach that addiction is more often than not the outcome of trauma, adverse childhood experiences, poverty, grinding, generational poverty, and fear. A public health approach reduces to bare statistics the lives and the hardships of our citizens. Support for what we urge here, the legally enforceable right to recovery, enables the provision of all necessary beneficial assistance, including all the measures recognised by the United Nations as humane, necessary initiatives to enable individuals to recover and to fulfil their potential and devote themselves, to their family, to their society, to their community, and to our country. Scotland as a nation will benefit when we treat all of our citizens suffering from addiction as individuals most worthy of respect, support, love, care, and attention. And when we do that, and we will, lives will be saved, families will be able to heal, and there will be hope. And one day, I'm going to be able to stop saying there's a quiet desperation coming over me, because I'm going to be able to say, as are each and every one of you and everybody out there, Scotland will become the different place we've got to be. I move the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Eva. And to second the motion, I'd like to call the wonderful Leanne Turbot. And then I'll be calling Fiona Sinclair for a remit back, and I'll be asking Fiona if she has a seconder for her remit back. Otherwise, I can ask on her behalf the floor for a seconder. So, Leanne Turbot.
Good afternoon, conference. Beer, vodka, Buckfast, trammies, DF 118s, valleys, pregabalin, speed, spice, atizolam, heroin, crack, snow. Now, you might know a few of these drugs, but if you grew up in a council estate, you know them all and many more. You know them all because you've seen some of your pals, some of your neighbours, and even your own family on them. You've then watched some of them get addicted to them, lose their jobs, lose their families, lose their health. Some of them end up in a box on the ground. I've never known an addict where I'm from who's recovered from addiction. They're either still addicts or they're dead from overdoses and suicide. The pain that causes to their family changes and affects that whole family for the rest of their lives. I've never seen anyone get help for their addictions. Yeah, I've heard some going into methadone, back on heroin, back on methadone, back on heroin, until they overdose. Substituting one drug for another does not solve addiction. The problems are still there. They don't go away when drugs are prescribed instead of bought from a dealer. We should be ashamed of the amount of the drug deaths in this country. We should be ashamed that for most there's no real effective help. There should be rehab for those that need it, with beds, doctors, nurses, therapy. We should have regular follow-ups with them to support them after their initial stay. We should have people working there with lived experience of addiction, people who understand, people who know what it's like to be them. We need to be bold in tackling this. We need specialised rehab facilities, and we need plenty, as right now we've got to have just abandoned our own. We also need to do way more to prevent the addiction, and so on to poverty. I despair at what's ahead. Rising food costs, fuel costs, it's just going to create a melting pot of misery amongst those that are already poor. Where there's poverty, there's mental health problems, there's anxiety, there's depression, there's chaotic lifestyles, there's a house full of constant worry and stress, there's relationship breakdowns, violence, physical ill health. This all opens up more opportunities for addictions to take hold. Bad situations, bad circumstances are escaped for a few hours by drinking it away or taking pills to feel better, then eventually it just takes hold. Is it shocking to say that everyone should have enough money for food and warmth and adequate housing? Isn't that just a basic human right? Working or not working? Some folk also look down on those on poverty. They don't see it as their problem, but it's everyone's problem. You help people out of poverty, you reduce crime, you reduce addictions, you reduce mental and physical health problems and take some strain off the NHS. You increase education levels as kids in schools got full bellies and less stressful homes. Poverty drives so many negative issues, causes so much more than just being skint. We've worked hard on this motion, we've talked for hours, we've listened to those with lived experience. I've ranted and raved more than once about the injustice of it all. I've poured my heart out and told them of every experience that I've had. I've had a family member die of an overdose, a young, funny, good-looking lad having his life support switched off. I've lived with a granddad with alcohol addiction, and I'm now witnessing another family member suffer alcohol addiction. A few weeks ago, a woman I've known all my life passed away in a care home on her own. Her husband died before her from alcohol addiction. Her daughter died before her from a heroin overdose. Her grandson died before her from an overdose, and her son died before her from suicide. Where does it stop? Where does it end for folk like us that grew up in deprived areas? It stops when we bloody well do something, when we listen to those that we need to listen to, those with first-hand experience, and when we act on what we are being told. Our folk have been abandoned, we've got a lot to fix. So when you see the statistics of these horrific drug and alcohol deaths, think of the people behind them. Think of their families, their mums, their dads, their brothers, their sisters. Maybe spare a wee thought for me and my family, an auntie that lost her funny, cheeky, young-looking nephew who overdosed, and think of his dad, who I think of as a brother, who lost his job and his home and his son and gained his own addiction. I'm asking you to please support this motion because I'm sick of watching my folk suffer. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. So it was very moving. I'd now like to invite Fiona Sinclair for the remit back and ask Fiona if she has a seconder.
I should have. Andrew Doherty actually seconded my amendment, and I believe he will also
Right,
haven't
so
spoken to him, but he
is
would.
Andrew Doherty in the hall?
Yes, he should
Yes.
be.
Andrew Doherty, can I just
Is he?
raise your hand? Are you here? Okay,
missed it.
right, well, in the spirit of encouraging debate as opposed to stifling it, can I please have a seconder from the hall so we can hear what Fiona has to say? Thank you very much. Fiona.
Thank you. I am speaking for the remit back on this resolution only because the amendments which I submitted have not been included in the final agenda. I support most of the resolution, so it is a great shame that the Conference Committee have decided not to permit any amendment. I am glad that one part of this resolution has been revised since the issue of the draft agenda, but there are a couple of other matters that I would like to highlight, and hopefully we can reach some kind of agreement on these. I am prepared to withdraw my remit back if the movers of this resolution will consider these matters and undertake to include them in the finalised policy. First of all, I know that the medical treatment of addiction is of paramount importance. In this resolution, it merits just one short sentence. For many years, the physical nature of addiction has been denied and downplayed in the media and in public policy making. That may very well be because, were this to be focused on, the wider nature of drug dependency would have attracted attention, and the pharmaceutical industry and its proxies would not have been too happy about that. As Professor Joanna McCreef has pointed out, some illegal drugs are chemically similar to those prescribed in the mental health system. Some of these drugs can be extremely addictive, and the medical profession has now been forced to accept this after many years of pressure from within its ranks and from the survivors of mental health treatment, which, in spite of what the public imagines, is almost wholly based on the use of psychotropic or psychiatric drugs. I am in full agreement with this resolution's support for a policy of abstinence and the facilities to enable this, but must point out that those who wish to come off psychotropic drugs have no specialist services and are too often told to use addiction services, adding insult to injury. I would caution against believing that this is somehow a class issue. Antidepressants, anxiolytics, and antipsychotics are now prescribed to nearly 1/5 of the population of Scotland, with much higher levels of prescription in areas of multiple deprivation. The longer-term prescription of psychotropic drugs is linked in international research to an average reduction of lifespan of 25 years. So far, no one seems to have picked up on the fact that Scotland's drugs death statistics are higher because they are not confined to those who die as a result of addiction to illegal drugs. The main concern of the political classes for decades has been the crime associated with illegal drug use, hence the parking of addicts on methadone for years and sometimes decades. I very much welcome this resolution's emphasis on getting people weaned off illegal drugs. I simply ask you to acknowledge that there are many more people who are dependent on prescription drugs, some of which are extremely addictive. Careful tapering of doses of these and illegal drugs are a necessary part of ending drug dependency because of the sometimes horrific withdrawal effects, which too often are misdiagnosed as worsening of mental illness. It is acknowledged that starting and coming off these drugs are the most dangerous times for those taking them and the public at large. The research is pretty conclusive that addiction to psychoactive drugs and alcohol represent the greatest risk of serious violence and not mental illness itself. The other matter I will briefly wish to raise is the reference to adverse childhood experiences. This is a designation imported from the United States, where screening for this is part and parcel of ACE-aware programs. I would advise great caution in inserting this into party policy. Psychiatric and psychological screening programs have an extremely unhappy and quite sordid record of labelling children, putting them on psychotropic drugs such as methylphenidate and antipsychotics such as risperidone, without doing anything about the social, economic and environmental problems that are causing children distress. The Teen Screen program in the United States is a classic example of this. By all means acknowledge that serious neglect and abuse in childhood predisposes children to poor outcomes in adulthood. It's reckoned as about 85 times the risk of getting a label of schizophrenia when you're an adult if you have multiple abuse and neglect. So basically acknowledge that, but do not give approval to a program of labelling that will do nothing to help them and will subject them to the real risks of psychotropic drugs. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Fiona. I'm going to invite Eva to sum up. That was the last card in, and just to give conference... Oh, sorry, have I missed a card? Sorry, give me a second. I have someone else who'd like to speak in favour of the motion. Yes, if you would like me. Thank you. Sorry, Eva, I know I'd called you. Mercy Kamanya, you in the hall, you've given me a card to speak in favour of the motion. Are you here? Yes, just coming. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Just as Mercy's coming up, Mercy will be the last speaker before Eva sums up. Just to give conference some guidance relative to the remit back. A remit back is exactly that. It goes back in its whole form. We can't make amendments. It's not amendments, can't be proposed and taken like that. It's a remit back that the card is in for. What I would say to Fiona is it's entirely possible, because you've covered some issues that are not in this motion, to submit a motion at the future date, particularly in relation to prescription drugs where that matter could be covered. But that's just for guidance for conference. Welcome, Mercy. You have 3 minutes and not a moment more. Thank you.
Start the clock. So good afternoon, and thank you very much for this opportunity to speak today. I'm going to speak about the drug addiction in reference to people from the ethnic minority communities. We have been having so many young people who have been dying. 2019, we buried so many young people who we don't know whether they were thrown in River Clyde or they just jumped. And most of those young people, they had issues to do with the drugs-related cases. And the moment we are dealing with other issues of knife crime, boys have been knifed, and some of them, as we speak today, I know of about 4 or 5 boys, young people, who are already in hospital at the moment because they have already been knifed, and it is drug-related. If I can go back to look at the history of what has brought those people to be able to do that, is because of the poverty. Poverty is hedged into the drugs addiction. Lack of employment is hedged into the drug addiction. Lack of direction, and sometimes role model among the African communities and other immigrants is an issue, because we don't have parents, we don't have generations. We are just here, some of them, they're from single parenthood, they're going to look for money, or look for my baby there, look for my baby there, and so those children did not have a very good upbringing, because they were tossed up and about to people from foreign countries, because we all come from diverse community, and so we leave our children to the person who is the dearest and the nearest, and sometimes they are not looked after properly. And so some of these people, young people, they have lost the direction, and now the drug has become an issue where they will say, okay, maybe I'll just start by just finding some few drugs over there, and then they start snorting it. And then they start becoming addicted. And then there they are, they're stuck in that kind of a situation, and there is no way to come out. And so we are raising a generation of young people who are affected by drugs, and these are very intelligent people, and this is because of poverty. Conference, I am very happy and very proud of our equality officer, a convener, that she has been able to look at the issue of poverty. Poverty is the reason why so many issues do happen. And so if we can address poverty, or either the issues of lack of employment, or these are the issues of drugs and lack of direction, will all be resolved. So I am here to support this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite Eva Cormier to sum up.
Can you hear me? The genesis of this motion was partly from professional and personal experience, but also from listening to the community. I don't like to refer to groups of individuals who've suffered loss and hurt as a community, but that's how they describe themselves. And so the content of this motion comes very much from discussions with people who have unfortunately walked that walk. And they know more than anybody else, and hopefully more than I will ever know, what walking that walk felt like. So Leanne spoke very, very poignantly and clearly from her heart about her experiences and those of her nearest and dearest, her neighbours and her friends and her community. I can only tell you this. I was humbled and reduced to tears on innumerable occasions listening to the lived and living experiences of very many of our brothers and sisters. But probably one of the hardest experiences of my life was a few weeks ago in George Square in Glasgow, listening to the voices of recovery on the International Day of Recovery. And I watched as many people already in recovery were able to narrate their own life histories and their own experiences, and I listened as others explained who they had lost and how many they had lost and the circumstances of their loss. And I listened especially closely to one young woman who had lost half a dozen close relatives in a very short period of time, and to another who spoke about, in the cost of living and fuel crisis in many parts of Scotland, the quickest and easiest way to get a heat into yourself and the cheapest way to get a heat is a handful of street valleys at 20 pence a pop. So I understand, Fiona, when you say there's one line here about medicalisation. That's deliberate. That's done with the full knowledge and the full support of the people of the recovery community, because medicalisation is a very small part of the addictions problems which face Scotland today. The biggest path out of that set of addictions and the biggest, best way to prevent future difficulties of this horrific nature are, as narrated in the UN policy, prevention, early intervention, psychosocial supports, rehabilitation structured appropriately and available when it is needed. The rehabilitation beds in Scotland today are far, far too low. They're almost as scarce as hen's teeth. So I say, sorry Fiona, we'll have to take it to the vote. I will not let down the people to whom I have listened, and what I will not do is what the Scottish Government does. The Scottish Government decides in rooms where they say they have consulted what the policy will be that they will impose on those who are suffering. I do not want Alba to be a party that dictates. Alba is a party who listens. We have listened to the people who have suffered. This motion is the product of that. I urge you to move it. And that will give our brothers and sisters the leg up that they need. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Eva. We'll now move to the vote first in relation to the remit back. All those in favour of the remit back, please raise your cards. All those against, the remit back falls. All those in favour of the motion, please raise your hands. Passed by acclaim. Thank you very much indeed. We now move to motion number 6, a luxury goods tax, to be proposed by Corey Wilson and seconded by Chris McElhenney. Corey Wilson.
Thank you, Conference. I'll be quite brief because we spoke about some of this, obviously, the taxation motion this morning. Firstly, I have no objection to luxury goods. Who doesn't like nice things? What I do object to is the fact that not everyone has access to luxury goods. We live in a world of haves and have-nots. Governments are supposed to be there to look after its citizens, act on our best interests, yet time and time again we see Westminster failing its people, whilst at the same time ensuring their chums are doing okay. Households across the country are facing unprecedented increases to what is their most basic needs, not luxuries, basic needs like food, like heating. Removing VAT from the energy costs would go some way to alleviating some of these spiralling costs. It's a no-brainer that those least affected by the cost of living crisis should have a greater burden of taxation placed upon them, especially when purchasing luxury goods. I'll say it again, luxury, not essential. Those that have should be looking out for those who don't. The Alba Party will always stand for fairness, equality of opportunity, justice, and that basic principle that we all look out for each other. Please support the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Cordy. I now call Chris McElhenney to second the motion.
Thanks, Conference. This time I'm seconding on behalf of Lee Wilson, who can't be here because he's unwell. I think it's a secondary service. I'll start off on to members that if you sadly take unwell, I'll be happy to stand up and second your motion for you. I think Corey Wilson has set out, exactly the broad principles of why this is a good idea. If you think back to the poll tax, it was a regressive form of taxation because it wasn't centred around someone's ability to pay. Millionaires paid the same as people, that were living on very low or little income whatsoever. And VAT is also a regressive form of taxation because, regardless of your personal wealth or income, everybody pays 20% on what is quite often essential items. But when we're facing a situation this winter that people across Scotland, an energy-abundant country where we'll have pensioners and many people living in poverty, struggling to heat their homes, choosing do they heat or do they eat, choosing do they have any privileges or luxuries in their lives. I think it's quite right that people that can afford to go out and spend £150,000 on a supercar should pay a higher tax on that, because quite clearly in this cost of living crisis, they're not feeling the pinch the same way that pensioners and those that are relying on benefits or those on low incomes, those on 0 hours contracts. We aren't all equal. Call it a Gucci tax if you want, but the reality is, in the midst of a cost of living crisis, we've got a choice as a country. Do we try and raise more tax income and direct it to those most in need, i.e. reduce VAT from 20% to 10%, saving the average Scottish household £2,500? There's a way to put more money in people's pockets to start actually driving down costs so that, we don't get into this situation that workers are having to go on strike because they can't get a pay rise that keeps up with inflation, because we've got a government that doesn't seem to make any effort to actually get inflation back down under control to a manageable level. Policies like this would make a difference. Policies the UK government could actually put in place right now, as opposed to the absolute carnage of the Chancellor being thrown under the mini-budget minibus to save Liz Truss's job. These are the policies that would make a difference to the people of Scotland. £2,500 into every extra home. People saving on their fuel and electricity from getting rid of that on fuel. It's an essential. People need gas to heat their homes. They need electricity to be able to live and cook food. So you don't pay VAT, on your baby milk at the supermarket. Why do you pay VAT having to heat it in your own home? That's why we should be scrapping it on energy bills. So I'm wholeheartedly endorse and support Corey Wilson's motion on this, and I would ask you to do also, Conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. I have no further cards in, so can I ask if the motion is passed by acclaim? Thank you very much, Conference. We now move to motion number 7, entitled Men Must Support Equality, to be proposed by David Henry and seconded by Eileen Newman. Welcome David Henry. Can I say, David, that those who don't follow Twitter as avidly as I do, for their benefit, I saw a certain David Henry at the All Under One banner march holding an Alba for Independence sign the whole time. Well done, David. Behind every speaker. Absolute trooper.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. Okay. Conference. Isn't it great to be in a party that actually believes and is going to deliver independence? Okay. Why do I think men must support equality, and why do I think it's important? So I've written a nice little speech here. I'm not sure I'm going to stick to it. That's the problem. Okay, the Alba Party passed a motion at our first conference to support equality and women's rights. I think we should all be very proud that we did that. But there was something missing, and that was men. Men voted for it, but very few spoke up for it. And I think it's about time we changed that. So why am I here in front of you talking about men must support equality? Well, it all started when I was still at school, which, by the way, was a long time ago. And it's because of my mother. And my mum was not just a mother or a housewife. She also had a part-time job. She also did the VAT returns and administration for my father's business. He was a painter and decorator. And so she had savings. And she had a driving license, and she wanted to buy a little second-hand car. This was in the early 1970s. So we went to a garage in Edinburgh called Appleyard. Quite posh, Custorf in Edinburgh. And we looked at a little Volkswagen Polo Derby. Light blue it was. It was about £1,500. In 1972, that was a lot of money. And my mother sat down with a car salesman, and they discussed buying this car. And she had the deposit, and obviously she had a part-time job. She had her own savings. The house was in joint names. Remember that? And she, after filling out the form, the car salesman then said, and I quote, "Now you will need your husband's signature as guarantor." And that is when I realized women were not being treated equally. And it shocked me then, and it still shocks me now, that we haven't moved on from there. The Equality Act 2010 is important, because it sets down in law 9 characteristics that are protected against law, and it's against the law to discriminate against any of them. But here's my message to every man in this audience and at home watching. Every man owes a debt of duty and gratitude to their mother who gave birth to them. Some of them may have forgotten or taken it for granted. I haven't. Women are equal. Sometimes they're actually better than equal, as they prove on many occasions. Men and women now need to unite to support equality. And that means, instead of me being one of very few people down on the women won't wished, and there was at least a dozen men there, out of, I think, at least 500 women, well, all I'd say is, where the hell were the rest of you? Conference, our elected politicians have a duty to uphold the law. Turning a blind eye or a deaf ear to women online being bullied and threatened is not acceptable, and it's happening every day. Our law enforcers must treat that online abuse as lawbreakers, and they must act. Social media is being used by a small number of people to abuse others, nearly always women. I find it abhorrent that female political elected members of the House of Commons are regularly on the receiving end from threats of murder, rape, and violence, while at the same time, political leaders of certain parties stay silent. Silence is treated by those abusers as somehow condoning it. Well, it's not acceptable, and we must call it out wherever we find it. A person's sex is a protected characteristic. Single sex, not gender, but single sex spaces are a human right, and they are protected under the Equality Act. It's time to stand up and be heard. We have a duty to protect every child from the potential risk, even if it's only a very small one, of someone gaining access to single spaces for women and girls. So we call on all political party leaders, especially male politicians, to stand up and speak up and say that they will support the Equality and the Equality Act and all 9 characteristics. Conference, it is shameful that our Scottish Government has failed to uphold the Equality Act. It is shameful that we have a female First Minister who has failed to protect women's rights. It is shameful that the First Minister has stayed silent when her own female MPs are being threatened and abused online by members of her own party. So let the message from the Alba party go out wide and be heard clearly. We do not support that sort of behaviour. It is shameful. And before I round up, this is Scotland. We should lead, because Scotland is the birthplace of universal education, the Common Good Fund, free education, and equality is not for sale. And I'm still under time, I believe.
You're not looking at me.
Okay, I'm deliberately not looking at you. So now, for a little bit of fun, I'm going to self-identify as Jennifer Aniston. Here comes the science bit. The 9 protected characteristics in the Equality Act are: 1, age; 2, disability; 3, gender reassignment; 4, marriage and civil partnership; 5, pregnancy and maternity; 6, race; 7, religion or belief; 8, sex, that's male or female; 9, sexual orientation. Bloody hell, being a woman's hard, isn't it? Conference, it's time for all men to remember their debt of gratitude to their mother. Let's make Scotland more equal. Please stand up for equality and support this motion. Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Eileen Newman to second the motion, to be followed by Michael Ojo, who'll speak in favour of the motion. And I'd like to invite any other men who'd like to speak to the motion, because we'd like to hear from you. Please welcome Eileen Newman.
Thank you, Tess. Conference, I come here today as a first-time speaker in support of the motion, Men Must Support Equality. I speak as a woman whose experiences will resonate with many women here today. I was born into a household with a violent, abusive father, and my trauma set in at a very early age before I went to school. I witnessed my mother lying in pools of blood with glass splinters in her head, or collapsing in the street on my way home from school due to her injuries. This was commonplace when I was young. I grew up in fear of men and was aware that none of them would come to my mum's aid. The police always took the side of the man. My father threatened to take myself and my brother away from my mother, and he used us as pawns. It was only when I reached the age of 10
that I was permitted by the police to give evidence against my father in court, and at that point the violence lessened. At the age of 12, I was sexually assaulted coming home from the cinema. My injuries resulted in a short hospital stay. My attacker was a serial sexual offender, yet he was given a suspended sentence because his wife was pregnant. I remember the shame as I read the newspaper coverage of the case. I was described as a black-stockinged schoolgirl, the inference being that my dress code probably encouraged my attacker. The black stockings were actually part of my school uniform, but the press didn't see it that way. The traumas experienced by women and their children leave deep scars which shape their lives and never leave the memory. I still can't stand the smell of blood. And I cannot go up into a supermarket aisle where there's meat. Please think of your children, your grandchildren, your sisters, your mothers, and teach your sons to respect girls as they grow up, because the trauma never leaves. Stand up and condemn bad behavior from a young age, with your children. Teach your sons to respect girls as they grow up. My experience happened many years ago, but the memories are just as clear and disturbing today. It's for my personality. I'm not a social mixer. I do work like this because I strongly believe in just, freeing people from injustice. But my memories are with me every single day. We have made progress, but not nearly enough. I would please ask that all men are supportive of equal rights for women and to change society for the better. Conference, please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Eileen. I'd now like to call Michael Ojo to speak in support of the motion. Michael, where are you? Somebody running to get Michael? Yes. Michael, it doesn't include a grand entrance from the front. You're supposed to be at the side. Welcome to Michael Ojo, who is also a first-time speaker, I believe. Come on, Michael. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, conference.
Hello.
This is my first time, as the chair lady has rightly said. I believe it's very, very important for men to support women. Because without women, we are nothing. As we've probably heard before, when they say, give a woman a house, she will give you a home. Women are the most important creation on earth. And I'm sure we can all agree to that. Women have impacted the world in general. When you look at, for example, a mother, what she brings to the table is priceless. I'm sure we all know of a survey that was carried out, like a job interview, whereby they had described a job role for countless women and men. in general. It was the men they are targeted, just for us to know how important women are. So the interview role described all the day-to-day activities of a woman. They had suggested that you get a job, there will be no holidays, there will be no bonuses, there will be no time out. You are required to do the laundry. You are required to be the laundry person. You are required to be the chef. You are required to be the driver. You are required to be the doctor. And every other occupation you can think of. So when people ask, okay, no problem. So how much would the salary be? And the interviewer said, I'm afraid you're not going to get paid. And you can tell from the amazement of the people being interviewed. You're like, how can I work and not get paid? And as you can imagine, the interviewer then ended up saying the role is a role of a mother. Conference, I would like to conclude by saying women are the most important species on this planet, and I would love to support all women. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. I'd now like to invite Alistair Davis to speak, again, what sounds like very emotionally, in support of the motion. Alistair Davis, please. Welcome. Take your time, take your time. Take your time. Welcome, Alistair.
Good afternoon, Conference. How are we? Well, some of you might remember me from the last one at Hampden. Yeah. Now, when I was 10 years old, my father left my mum and went down to England to be with my stepmother. Now, my father died 13th of November 2014. I will say I don't miss him. But what he used to do was, he would take all the money, scream at her to confine her in the bedroom, and it wasn't a very nice experience. My father was an abuser, a domestic abuser. He was scum. And I think for too long, women have suffered at the hands of male abusers. Sorry, it's getting a wee bit emotional up here. Now, please remember, we all have a mother. We all have a biological mother. It is true, everyone has a biological father as well, but not everyone knows who the biological father is thanks to IVF. But we're all here thanks to our mother and her mother before and their mother before. So please remember, take care of women, support this motion, support equality, and if you don't mind, I'd like to stray a little bit. And just while I'm here, I'd also like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the victims of the terrible tragedy last Friday in Donegal at Creeslough. Absolute tragedy. Thanks well done to the emergency services. But please, support this motion. Support women. Equality is a human right.
It will come as no surprise to you if I say there are no cards in against the motion. You'd have to be a brave soul to do that. Can I ask, therefore, with a resounding applause, if the motion is passed by acclaim? Thank you very much indeed, Conference. Now we move to the last motion before topical emergency resolutions and lots of prize giving, and that is energy regulation, to be proposed by Abu Merin and seconded by David Henry. Are you both? There you are, Abu. Welcome, Abu. Welcome. I'm hoping, Alba, you're going to retail your experiences that were given in the press about your ridiculous bills. So, welcome to Alba Mearn to propose the motion.
Thank you, Dasvina. Good afternoon, conference. Now, conference, every household and every business require energy. We cannot live without energy. That is why the recent massive price increases are so serious and affect everyone. Conference. The Conservative and Unionist Party privatized the UK energy sector. And I would like to tell you what recently happened to me, as I think my experience is quite typical. And I'm quite sure that most of us probably have been through this one. And yeah. I was a Tonic Energy customer until November 2020, paying my energy bills of £108.61 per month by direct debit. Then Scottish Power took over the account and continued to charge me the same amount of £108.61 till September 2021. The monthly amount was then increased to £159 per month till 29th of December 21. Scottish Power then increased the monthly energy bill to £199 per month till March 2022. Here it comes. On the 4th of April, the month of April Fool, the Scottish Power issued a bill of £759.55. That was on 4th of April. And then again on 6th of April 2022, Scottish Power issued a further bill of £1,567.54. Was that a joke? Sadly not. From April 2022, they started taking £321 per month from my bank account by direct debit. Conference. My uses of energy haven't changed. On 27th of June 2022, Scottish Power took £756 from my account without giving me any prior notice. I contacted their customer service about the sudden increase. They claimed, this is your bill, you have to pay. I was shocked by her attitude. Then I decided to change my supplier. I asked her to cancel the direct debit and that I would change my supplier. Sadly, she didn't care. Well, on 27th of July 2022, Scottish Power took another £756 from my bank account. Hence, I have cancelled the direct debit with my bank, demanding a refund as Scottish Power breached the direct debit guarantee. The bank issued a refund. Conference, I then contacted Utility Warehouse and they quoted me an average based on my postcode and the size of the house, the sum of £165 per month. I agreed to go with them and start the transfer process. However, Scottish Power had their ideas and they refused to allow me to change supplier. I raised a complaint with Citizen Advice Bureau and they advised me to write a formal letter of complaint to Scottish Power and allow 10 days to reply. I started seeking advice from my friends and also contacted the editor of Edinburgh Live. The editor contacted the Scottish Power and within 3 days of her contacting the Scottish Power, I received an email from Scottish Power confirming that they have made a mistake when calculating my bills. Wow, what a relief. Conference, the moral of the tale is that the regulator of GIM is meant to monitor that all energy companies must bill accurately. Ofgem is failing to regulate the energy sector. We all are paying for it. Conference acknowledges that the regulator Ofgem was set up to regulate the retail supply of energy to households across the UK, but has failed to act. We demand all Scottish MPs to direct the regulator Ofgem to act without delay to regulate the maximum retail price that energy suppliers can charge for energy and to set an energy cap for each type of energy generation. Scottish renewable energy should not include cross-subsidies of gas-generated electricity. We demand the UK government to direct Ofgem to act without delay and reverse the excessive cap increases during 2022. Ofgem must set separate prices cap for electricity generated by renewable. We demand that the Scottish government to demand that the UK government must act to ensure that the Scottish electricity is supplied to Scottish households at a price that reflects its cost of generation. We demand the UK regulation Ofgem to stop energy suppliers from cross-subsidizing different electricity generation supplies. Scottish renewable energy generation has nothing to do with burning gas. Conference. We all should be committed to support Scottish households and small businesses from excessive price increases of electricity and gas in this living crisis. Conference. I urge all of you to support this motion. Please support this motion. Thank you very much.
I now call David Henry to second the motion. David, you have 3 minutes, and everybody has you on a stopwatch.
I only have 3 pages. Conference. I'm going to tell you a story, but a short one. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, well, just about 120 miles from here, in 1986, a wicked witch called Thatcher started to privatise our energy sector. British Gas and the regional public electricity suppliers held a monopoly on supplying all domestic gas and electricity. And this ensured that the government of the day was in charge of pricing and any price rises, usually in line with inflation and once every 3 years. British Gas was floated on the stock market in 1986, accompanied by the famous Tell Sid. Do you remember that? Advertising campaign which promised that we could still, in quotes, own it through our shares. We already did own it. It was publicly owned. Our energy system is privatized at every stage: generation, transmission, distribution, and supply. While we have had price rises of over 100% this year, France has had 4%. Privatization was supposed to bring competition and lower prices. Well, Conference, I've got a question for you. Do you have lower prices? No. Scotland generates over 97.5% of its electricity from renewables. And I've checked. The price of wind hasn't changed. In 2021, here's a nice little factoid for you. The National Grid shareholders received £1.4 billion in dividends, money that could have been reinvested back into the system, and that's just the cost of distributing the electricity. The shareholders are not based in Scotland. Conference, when Scotland is an independent country, we can choose a better way. We discussed it earlier today. We can choose to have a Scottish publicly owned energy company. Oil and gas companies operating in Norway pay corporation tax of 22% and a special tax of 56% every year. That's a windfall tax, not once, but every year. And the benefit is the population of Norway. When the energy sector was privatized, regulation was put in place that was meant to prevent market abuse. It was to ensure that consumers, by the way, that's you and I, didn't get overcharged. Ofgem became that energy regulator on the 1st of November 2000. Ofgem is required, amongst other things, to fully enforce the Competition Act 1998. What's that, I hear you ask? The Competition Act bans many things, including anti-competitive agreements between businesses, including fixing prices and abuse of a dominant position. These are all banned. Ofgem is legally required to enforce that law. They've not been doing it. Bad boy. 3 pages, 3 pages, it should be 3 minutes. My closing remark. Conference, we call on the UK regulator Ofgem to stop allowing energy companies to cross-subsidise different sources of electricity. Why are you, in a country that generates 97.5% of its electricity from wind, being charged the cost of gas being burnt in England in power stations because they didn't bother to invest in wind? And finally, after all, Conference, this is what the wicked witch Thatcher was trying to create in the 1980s when her Conservative and Unionist Party, and let's remember who's to blame for this, because this is their policy that we now find out 30 to 40 years later is causing chaos. She wanted us to have choice, competition, lower prices. Well, how's that working out? Support the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, David Tenney. I'd now like to call our final speaker to speak in favour of the motion. I'm going to try and get the pronunciation correct. Please correct me when you come up. Kings Nwaukorobia? I know you're going to correct me. Kings, welcome.
Conference, good afternoon. My name is King Nwaukorobia, a party candidate at Party East and Kevin the World, Glasgow, and this last election. I'm supporting the motion on energy regulation because it seems to me that I've been a nagging man. I know nagging is meant for women, but Scottish Gas have made me to be a nagging man because every month I'm on my phone arguing and fighting with them over cost or over the bill they sent to me to pay. Fortunately, I moved into a new house late December. And from December to today, it's every month, it's either they're going to take me to court or I'm begging them to take me to court just because the kind of bill they send to me, I keep asking them if my house is a commercial house or just a house of 4, 2 adults and 2 kids. I believe that there's no regulation in energy sector anymore because I pay almost £350 every month just to make sure that my house is warmed up. And I don't see how I'm using such an amount of money or amount of energy in my house. So I'm here standing asking the conference that we should, to move the motion that we should ask Ofgem to really regulate the energy sector because I'm thinking that the owners of those companies are using the poor people in Scotland and across the world, across the UK, to make money. Just last week, they took up £1,200 from my account without telling me, without sending me any letter, without saying, just as something touched me, I said, let me check my account, only for me to see that British Gas have collected 800 and something pounds electricity, 400 and something pounds gas. I became mad. As in, I was shouting. People will know that I was shouting because it was temporary madness for me. What did I use? Under 1 month, I have to call them, and they said, well, the energy is high, and because of that, you have direct debit. We think that is what you have consumed. They thought that is what I have consumed. I was begging them to come to my house and take their meter, and check their meter reading, and take everything, that I'm no more interested. So I believe that a lot of people are passing through this in their houses. They may not speak up, but this is an opportunity for us to stand up and hold energy sector in their boards. They need to come and reduce their charge. At the end of the year, they will be setting up a profit which they have gotten from the people. The people are suffering, the big men are eating the money. So I'm here standing standing for the motion that we need to regulate the energy sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. There are no cards in against motion number 8 on energy regulation. Can I ask delegates if the motion is passed by acclaim? We now move to our topical emergency resolution for this afternoon, which I'm hoping will appear behind me. This is in relation to free speech in public, as I mentioned at the start of this session. It's demanding that conference do the following. Demand the Scottish Government to absolve the protesters recently arrested, releasing them from bail and quashing any sentences imposed thus far. These are the protesters that are protesting at the Queen's funeral. Conference calls for Police Scotland to provide appropriate training to its officers to understand what free speech is and how it is protected in Scots law. Number 3, Conference urges Police Scotland and local authorities to ensure that all events, marches, protests, etc. are equally facilitated. And Conference urges that the Scottish Government review breach of the peace to ensure that it excludes free speech and right to protest or demonstrate. And to propose that topical motion, can I invite Kevin Shaw, who will be followed by Lauren Lehman, who will second the motion. Kevin Shaw, please, to propose.
Good afternoon, Conference. I'm somewhat saddened, angry and scared that I'm having to present yet another motion relating to free speech, in effect, at 2 conferences on the trot. Last time I proposed, a motion for the LACU on the basis of the laws that have been placed to prevent demonstrations outside the Parliament building and other areas. And now I'm here again. We saw a large public engagement with the funeral arrangements for Queen Elizabeth of Scots and the ascension to the throne of King Charles III. In the course of these events, there have been a number of arrests and charges of people promoting Republican or anti-royal views. The charges have generally been for breach of the peace. This is a catch-all offence intended to prevent disorder, not to prevent the expression of views contrary to those of the establishment. To the best of my knowledge, based on publicly available evidence, none of the actions were likely to cause any significant disorder. Where the timing and locations of the actions could be considered inappropriate given the solemnity of the occasion, surely it would be more appropriate to remove the offender from the time and place and release them without charge after the event was over. Certainly in one case, the offender was assaulted by members of the public. Initially, they weren't arrested, but I gather now that they have been arrested for assault offences. One of the people who was arrested, a gentleman in his 70s, was brought to the Sheriff Court immediately and fined something in excess of £300 plus £50 plus for stating something that he believed in. Now, that's free speech, and it costs you £350 a time. I think we've got a bit of a problem here. Another related incident was that of a young woman who was followed home by police, having held up a blank piece of paper in the Royal Mile. That is extremely dodgy. It was 2 policemen, and she engaged with them. She refused to give her name and address, as she had no reason to, and they stated to her they're following her to make sure there is no breach of the peace. That was intimidation. And in the context of what's happened in the Metropolitan Police, with what's happened to various people who've been assaulted and attacked by members of the police force in and out of uniform, it's really worrying. And when you bear in mind that Police Scotland is the 2nd largest police force in the UK after the Metropolitan Police, you can only assume that there must be some bad apples there. So there is a risk, and inappropriate behaviour like that is unacceptable. Other things that have happened have been the sudden cancellation of the Festival at short notice with no good reason on the 18th of September. There were also a couple of incidents, thankfully not in Scotland, where groups of lesbians were ejected from pride events because they were being abused, by members of the trans community. And what is going on? So the core of this motion is to try and let everybody know Alba and Alba members will not stand for this. Bearing in mind what Martin Keating said earlier, it is very likely we are going to have to put our heads even further above the parapet than we do now in order to achieve independence one way and another. So we need to make sure that we can do that in a reasonable way. We can have a reasonable method of saying what we want to say, what we need to say, and communicating our ideas without risk of imprisonment or fines. I ask you to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Cavan. I now invite Lauren Lehman to second the motion. Welcome, Lauren. Yeah, the gentleman, I'll take your point of order quite quickly. Sure. Sure. Thank you very much indeed. The motion was just given to me at the end of lunchtime. I did ask that it be kindly transposed onto a slide behind me. Has that been done? It's being done. I can't hear you. In 1 minute, yes. So before you require to vote, sir, it will be up there so you can see. I read at the start what it was asking conference to do, but I appreciate it. That was a quick read through. Apologies, it'll be with you before you require to vote. Okay, hopefully that satisfies you. Thanks very much. Sorry, thank you very much, Lauren.
Thank you, Chair. Conference, I'm delighted to speak for the first time in support of a motion regarding free speech. Personal freedom underlies any successful independent democratic state, and there's no more foundational freedom than the right to have independent thought and the right to express one's mind. The motion of the text, which you will see soon, involves police action against anti-royalist protesters at events surrounding the Queen's passing. I'm certain most people there found this rather disruptive, in fact offensive, but it is not an offense. Perceived breaches of politesse should not be used for policing expression. It seemed the media mainly focused on the stories of those who were arrested, particularly the young man who shouted at Prince Andrew. But what resonated with me was the young woman who was followed home just for holding a sign. I may no longer be young, but I still hold signs and I still protest. Frequently, I'm with the majority opinion. Occasionally, I'm not. Case in point, in 2019, I joined a group of gender-critical lesbians and allies and marched in Edinburgh Pride. We were not popular by any means. The 8 of us had our slogans, our little songs and things, and were drowned out by sound by the people surrounding us. A couple other marchers goaded the crowd to come in and around us. And the police moved close to us, backs to us looking out, making sure everybody was safe and nothing escalated. Nothing did. We all marched peacefully. It was fine. But throughout the march, young women kept coming up to us, whispering that they agreed with us, but they couldn't say anything. Now, at the time, I, of course, thought it's intimidating to be in the minority. They're fearful of the threat from other people marching, but it never occurred to me they'd have to worry about being followed home by the police And it never occurred to me that instead of the police standing by me, that instead they determined that we were a disruptive group of 8 women, that we were in fact breaching the peace and would be removed. It could have happened to us. It could happen to anybody in this room. With our shared belief in independence and our shared work ethic of being boots on the ground and protesting and marching, certainly there are plenty that find us offensive and disrupted and would like to see us intimidated. Now, we will win Scottish independence, but it would be a somewhat hollow victory if free speech wasn't guaranteed. I'd rather be shouted at and debate from the opposition, even amongst ourselves, than to have the silence of forced compliance. And I'd certainly rather have policing that enhanced my sense of personal freedom and protected me expressing myself, or any one of us, rather than being patronized by protecting me from disagreement. So, conference, I strongly urge you to join me and support the motion. Thank you.
I have a number of cards in, so I'd like to call Robert Slavin, to be followed by Martin Lawson Olu Osagi, and then there's a few more after that. Robert Slavin, our newly elected local government convener. Welcome, Robert. And if you haven't been to the Eagle Inn in Coatbridge, you haven't lived. Welcome, Robert.
I was going to mention that in this wee bit here. Let's hope I'll last a wee bit longer than Kwasi Kwarteng in my post as well. I just want to speak on behalf of the motion about free speech. As Tasmina said, I read the Prism Roadshow in Eagle Inn, I think it was about 3 weeks ago. An absolutely fantastic day. Really, what we're going to say, robust, rustic, earthly language. And I would hate to think that would be suppressed, because we all need to be able to voice our opinion, regardless of what side of the debate you're on. We have to be able to stand there and give your opinion without fear you're going to get drowned out. And it goes to a wider context, it's like, you can't just have free speech for the speech that you like. You've got to be able to have free speech for the speech you don't like. I mean, you look at that haunted Victorian pencil, Jacob Rees-Mogg. I hate him. Can't listen to him. The guy doesn't know. He doesn't know if he's a tribute act for a ventriloquist dummy or somebody out the Beano. But, I mean, I just switch him off. But he's got the right to say what he wants to say, although I don't agree with it. So I think we're going down a bad road here in Scotland. You can see it. There's dissenting voices, whether you're critical of the GRA bill, you shout it down. You see it on all the social media platforms. That's not acceptable. It's not acceptable for anyone. Regardless of what side of the debate you're on, we have to make sure everybody's got the right to speak and their opinion be heard. And that's really all I want to say. And I'll see you later, conference.
Thank you, Robert. I'd like to call Martin to be followed by Judith Reid. And while Martin is making his way up to the stage there, the wonderful team at the desk, their reception, who deserve a round of applause for signing everybody in. Gail, Henry, Karen and her team, they have a set of lost car keys at the front desk. The message says, and Gail's a teacher, if someone comes and says what make and what is on the car key, we'll reunite them with the owner. Aye, doesn't he suffer fools gladly, so don't try and get away with a free car. You'll need to demonstrate why they're your keys. With that, Martin, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, conference. Sorry, I really don't like speaking most time because I feel very creepy with my voice, but I will speak when it has to do with freedom of speech. We have to be very aware that the North Korea cases and every other part of the world, that it is very difficult to express yourself today, did start gradually. And we have to stand up and make sure that at every given opportunity, that freedom of speech is defended and protected by all means. If I want to quickly go into He said, firstly, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because it was the communists. Then they came for the unionists. I did not speak out because it was the unionists. Then they came for the socialists. I did not speak out because it was the socialists. Then they came for the trade unionists. I did not. Then they came for the Jew. I did not speak out because it was the Jew, and I'm not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out. So it is extremely important. It is extremely important for us to speak out when you see that freedom of speech is being trampled upon by any means in any place, whether it affects you, because if you think it does not affect you today, it's a circle, and it definitely is going to affect you some days. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would stand here today, or I'm standing here today to support the motion that freedom of speech should be protected by all means by Alba Party. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And I'd like to call the wonderful Judith Reid to be followed by Dave Llewellyn and then Robert Reid, who will be our last speaker. Judith, all the way from the Highlands. Welcome.
Good afternoon, conference. How are you all doing? Okay, then, here we go. This is all about free speech. Thank you. The right of freedom of speech is a fundamental human right. However, it sometimes seems that freedom of speech only counts if you agree with the rest of the fashionable media narrative. If we cannot say what we think under our own roof, then we have no roof. Freedom of speech is not a license to abuse, to be intimidated, or to be abused into any silence or fear. It is a personal responsibility. As my granda and my late dad always encouraged me, you've got a good Scots tongue in your head and use it. And as many of you here today can confirm, we respect whether respectfully agree or not. I have, I can, and I will speak out for those who feel that their voice is silenced. Please support the motion. Okay.
Next speaker is Dave Llewellyn, to be followed by Robert Reid. Dave.
Hi, conference. Last time I stood before you, I started off with, I'm a criminal. Guess what? I'm again. 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, I was up in court where I was found guilty, basically, of freedom of speech. I was originally charged with threatening to kill somebody. And eventually, what they found me guilty of was a breach of the peace kind of thing that basically I got a year's social work care. And that's what I got for threatening to kill somebody, apparently. It was political. It was a political attack. It was the same kind of attack that was on Craig Murray a year and a half ago, and it was all for the same reason. Everybody that stood up in Alex's case has been taken off, and every time they open their mouth, they get people trying to shut it. And yet, they're using the courts all the time to be able to stop people from actually telling the truth about what happened. Speech should always be free. And until it is, they're going to hear more of us.
Thank you, Dave. And now our final speaker, Robert Reid. Robert, welcome.
Now, I know I opened today saying I wouldn't be back in front of you today, so I do apologise for that. I'm not normally one to break my promises, but I seen this topical motion and I felt compelled to get up and speak in favour of it. And I want to hope to convey my experiences at the hands of this insidious cancel culture. As many of you will know, I was a candidate in Aberdeen during the local elections earlier this year. My ward was Tillydrone, Seaton in Old Aberdeen. At its heart is the ancient campus of the University of Aberdeen, my alma mater. We had organised a wee Alba Book Roadshow event at one of the university buildings. This event was agreed upon by the Students' Association and the university. On the day of the event, I was at a local mosque speaking to the imam and constituents. I received a phone call saying that the event was now in jeopardy as they'd received lots of complaints and I needed to visit the student union. I was greeted by a young woman, I'll keep her identity anonymous, but we'll give her a fake name, Ailey, she, her. And that was exactly how she introduced herself. So I knew at that point I was probably in for a bit of a hard ride with this particular audience. I was told that the union had to cancel the event because the views of our party apparently cause harm to minority communities within the university community. Now, I think you can see with the broad range of speakers that have been on stage today that this party embraces minority communities and speaks loud and clear for them. Now, this was obviously complete and utter nonsense, but they went ahead and cancelled the event. They'd obviously overlooked the fact that it's a near impossible mission to silence a man like Alex Salmond. So we held the event anyway, outside in the freezing Aberdeen cold. It was a pleasure of my life to be cancelled by my own university for talking about independence of all issues, but to do so alongside a political Goliath like Alex Salmond made it all the sweeter. This is an extremely worrying trend, though, that we've seen developing across institutions around the country, from myself in Aberdeen to Lisa Keogh in Dundee and to Dr. Neil Thin at the University of Edinburgh. Universities are far more than just buildings, bricks and mortar. For centuries, they have been the bastions of free speech, and that's what they should always strain to represent. Now, I used the word insidious earlier, because it is insidious. It's slowly creeping into all areas of society. As the motion notes, protesting the monarchy in Scotland, or telling some home truths to an overprivileged duke. I think we as a party should always be the champions of free speech, because once this authoritarian culture takes hold, it is extremely difficult to keep at bay. So please, support this motion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Robert. There are no cards in against. I'm hoping everyone has had the opportunity to see the motion as it appears on the screen behind me. Given there's no cards in against, can I ask that the topical motion be passed by acclaim? Now, we move to a very special part of proceedings, which is the announcement of LACU Award winners. Please, I'm going to ask Corey to join me. As you can see, we've made some lovely awards. We asked LACUs up and down the country to nominate people who they suggested had gone above and beyond in terms of campaigning. And I'm delighted to announce some of these amazing winners today. You're not required yet. You can just sit there. Me and Corey have got this one covered. You're the next one on the agenda. Right. There's no point in writing instructions out. So the first LACU who sent a nomination was Perth. And I'm hoping that the recipient is in the hall. I'd like to invite, for Activist of the Year, a stalwart in the LACU as described and should be recognised as such. Please welcome Sally Hughes. Would you like to say a few words?
I'm dead chuffed. Thank you very much.
are on a journey and it gets hard at times. And I've been kept going by the people that I've met and the people I continue to meet. And I don't see that ending anytime soon. So we'll keep going and doing the best we can. I don't see any other route available. When it gets really, really tough, I take my hat off to an act of bravery, a gentleman there, because as most people will be aware in this room, he was put through the mill in a most incredibly bad faith way, and he got back up and he put himself back out there. So with that example to follow, I'll keep doing the best I can, and I won't be alone. Thank you very much.
We now turn to South Ayrshire Lacu. And by the way, if you're from the Lacus that aren't mentioned here and you've not got nominated, you need to go back and ask your conveners what's been going on. Because there's just 6 awards, so where's the rest of you? South Ayrshire Lacu award goes to the most wonderful council candidate, indeed, an award in South Ayrshire, Denise Somerville. Welcome, Denise.
Nobody told me I had to do an acceptance speech. Kieran, where are you? Because you said I didn't have to do this, so I hide behind the clipboard. I'd just like to dedicate this to the local Lacu, because without my campaign team behind me, I would never have been able to be here today. So thanks very much to each and every one of you for supporting me. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, The next award goes to a member from the Dundee Lacu, and I'm just going to read out exactly what we received. We would like to nominate Ashley Miller for the Activist Award. Despite being registered blind, Ashley has done her best to get out and leaflet with the rest of us. She has set up street stalls for us in the town centre and at various locations in Dundee, and has done this despite all physical difficulties in doing so. She's our Lacu treasurer and has made sure that our funds are well looked after. I think that means she doesn't give you any money. And has managed to navigate all the income and outgoings associated with our bank account during the local election campaign and for expenses involved with our local events. We think, as do we, that she is a deserving recipient of this award. Please welcome Ashley Miller. Can you take it from there? And Corey is just going to pass Ashley a award, and hopefully Ash will hear from Ashley.
Just like to say thank you. This was a lovely surprise. We're very lucky in Dundee because we all work together as a great team. And we have amazing support with our Facebook group. The admins of the Facebook group do an amazing job. We all work together with Twitter, and some of our pensioner activists have been out and helping with the stalls as well when they can. So we're just all having to work together to get the message out, because we're not getting as much publicity as we should be getting, working on the streets, because we're all haters and turfs and everything else, and explaining that that's not the case. So I'd like to say thank you, and thank you, Dundee Lacu. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you very much indeed, Ashley. The next award goes to a member of West Lothian Lacu. She can't be here to accept the award, so it's going to be accepted on her behalf by Martin. But the award goes to Doreen Milne. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm accepting this on behalf of Doreen, and I'm afraid to tell you the reason that Doreen can't be here today. It's our upcoming candidate in the Uphall, Broxburn and Winsborough Award. I'm afraid Debbie's a keep fit fanatic, and she managed to convince 65-year-old Doreen to take up jogging. That's right, she got a leg injury, so I don't think Doreen will be winning the award for chapping the doors in the upcoming election in Uphall, Broxburn and Winsborough for our upcoming. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Martin. Please pass Doreen on our very best. We now move to Aberdeen City Lacu, and a name I know well, and I know what a hardy campaigner she is. A well-deserved award goes to Teresa Duffy. Teresa. I think we should keep clapping till you get here.
I don't really know what to say except thank you to all the members of the team, because it was a team. We all pulled together. It's really for all of us. We had such a great time. We had a fantastic party afterwards, and if somebody said, is this what losing looks like? God, we'll be dead if we win something. A hilarious team, many highlights. In particular, I'm looking at Rob over there, that event at the university. And while we've got a great team, thank you, Alex, for all you do. Every day, it's been a pleasure, and we wouldn't have done it without you. So thank you.
Now, our final award goes to somebody who we didn't think was going to be able to join us this afternoon. And she'll perhaps give you those reasons herself. But I'm really delighted, really pleased. The final award goes to the most wonderful and well-loved Trish McPherson for Aberdeenshire Lacu.
Well, this is a surprise. As Taz has alluded to, I wasn't quite sure I was going to be here today, and it would have been much better if Hamish had come up here and just accepted this for me. Up until about 4 hours ago, I was in the ARI, but I told my partner that I had to come to conference, so he had to come, and I got discharged and got down here to be with you this afternoon. So I'm absolutely delighted to accept this award. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Trish. We now move to the announcement of honorary membership, when I will be passing to Alex. But before I do so, I wanted to remind you of who Alex bestowed this upon last year. One was a certain Moira Brown. You might remember our 6,000th member. I don't know if she's here today. I certainly haven't seen her yet. She's probably still, well, the last time I saw her was a message that Hector MacLeod, another of our members, had posted on Twitter to say she was busy supporting the Tartan Army in Poland. I don't even know if she's got back yet, but that sounds like good old Moira. But the other person who received honorary membership was the wonderful grouse beater Gareth Wardell, who is here. Who is here this afternoon and who I'd like to invite to say a few words. Gareth, where are you?
Those people who've been surprised to see me and said, I thought you were dead. I answer, can you see me? My good friend here has given me a few minutes to pimp my books, the first 2 editions, the third and last one of the trilogy. I made it. The last one of the trilogy will be out before Christmas, so if you have not bought any, then you've got a lot of money to pay to get all 3. Whenever there's a crowd, some entrepreneur, some smart Alec will pop up to sell something. In Liz Taylor's film of Cleopatra, it was the big moment where she's brought out on this giant chair, and you've got to try and imagine the scene. It's 90 degrees in the shade, and this film is costing millions every day, and she's off ill all the time, and so the budget keeps going up and up. So this is the last chance to get this take. And try and imagine the wee Italian refugees who've built all the giant Egyptian scenery in the background. And she's brought out on a huge giant chariot pulled by 16 horses with Egyptians on the horses. In front of them, there's 4 camels, and before them, 2 elephants. And there's 3,000 extras there. And the director's behind the camera on a crane, and he shouts action. The trumpets go and the drums beat, and this whole panel play of this huge, huge march comes out from the back. And he goes up on the crane like that, and he gets so high, and he says, "Cut! Cut! Get that first Schleginger son of a bitch off the set!" And right in the middle was a little guy selling ice cream. Now, just a couple of minutes more. At the start of book 1, I write about my cousin, Ian Christie. Ian was a first-class journalist, trained in Scotland when a journalist was a journalist and not a hack. And he was working for the Times and Reuters. And they sent him to Mozambique to follow the independence battle, struggle against the Portuguese. And he got to meet the leader of the people who've been downtrodden. Samura Machel, a charismatic democratic socialist. So charismatic and so democratic that the Queen invited him to dinner at least a couple of times. So his job was to report back to the Times and Reuters what was happening, the slash and burn that the Portuguese were doing. And he would go around the various villages and towns and give a speech to lift their spirits. And then one day, Ian started to write back also about Rhodesia and what Ian Smith, the Prime Minister, was doing in that apartheid state. And the British newspapers didn't like it, so they played a double game. They smeared him. They said he was a communist, Lord Ho-Ho of Africa. Ian was really mad. He died only a few years ago. He was a pipe smoker, cancer of the tongue, and he was given a hero's funeral by Mozambique. Not a single newspaper in the UK mentioned it. The head of Mozambique said that this Scotsman had taught them what democracy meant. Now I'm going to ask you quickly to listen to this short anecdote, which is not in the book. He followed Samura Machel to each town and village, and Machel would give this big speech. "We are going to drive the Portuguese murderers off our land. We will send the colonialists home.
And afterwards, the villagers would stand up and say, "Viva Frelimo." Can you say that? Viva Frelimo. 1, 2, 3. Viva Frelimo. Okay, that's the Mozambique word for freedom. So, at the end of the speech, he turned to Ian and he said, "My people, this Englishman has come all the way from Great Britain to tell the world of our struggle against those oppressors. Wah!" Let's hear it. Wah! Frelimo. Afterwards, Ian said, "You know, that was a great speech, a wonderful speech, but I have to correct you. I'm not Scots. I'm not English, I'm Scots." And Samura Michelle said, "Well, I understand that, but my people they wouldn't know a Scotsman if they met one, but they know an Englishman. They know from the British Empire." No, he said, "Look, it's important to me, Samura. If you just correct that, we'll be fine. Next village, big speech. We will drive the Portuguese murderers from our soil. Viva Frelimo!" And this Scotsman has come all the way from London to tell the world about our struggle. And afterwards, Ian said, "Please, Michelle, that was an inspiring speech, but I didn't come from London. I came from Scotland." And Samura said, "I know that, but how can I tell my people that? They've never actually heard of Scotland. It's a tiny little country. It's important to me," said Ian. "Please, just make the correction." Last village, big speech, and the crowd really just jumped up in the air, and they said, "Viva Frelimo!" And he turned Samura to Ian and said, "This Scotsman has come all the way from his homeland to tell the world of our struggle. Scotland who won its struggle against independence against the English imperialists." And afterwards, Ian said, "Oh, for God's sake," he said, "I was moved to tears, but, you know, Samura, we lost. We didn't win our independence." And Samura said, "I know that. How the hell can I tell my people that?" And finally, that's me telling you what it's like to be a Scotsman in a country that should be independent again, autonomous. Remember this. The colonial will always tell you your predicament is forever. You can't get out of it. As Alistair Union Jack said, suck it up. Okay? You need to understand that, how brutal the British state is, especially with our resources that it needs. Never, ever forget when you're down, when you're in despair, when you feel you've got to the bottom and having to start again. No nation ever rose up to demand its abolition. Viva Alba!
Thank you, Gareth. I'd now like to invite our party leader to hand out this year's honorary membership. Alex.
Delegates, as many of you will know, one of my greatest friends in life was Bashir Ahmed. And Bashir came to see me in the 1990s and said, look, you know, if you cross the road, you'll find that, and meet the Asian community of Scotland, you'll find so many willing supporters of independence. And Bashir was as good as his word, and through his influence, we changed the colour of the SNP and made it much more reflective of Scotland in the late 1990s. And Bashir went on to become the first Scots Muslim and the first Asian member of the Scots Parliament, and tragically died in his term, but he was one of my greatest friends in life. Now, when Bashir was organising all these things, I came to realise there was a Kashmiri gentleman who seemed to be at every single event. And then I found out that actually this gentleman was organising every single event. And when anything was wanting done, this is the gentleman that did it. And that has continued to this day. We're all going to go, and it's a huge value, and the chair didn't ask me to say this, but I'm going to say it, at £20 for the curry ceilidh tonight. If any of you haven't got tickets, then you're daft. It's the best value you'll get in Stirling, I can tell you that. Well, where do you think the curry came from for the curry ceilidh tonight? Send for Abdul Majid. When I did transported, as I frequently do, from one end of the country to another, send for Abdul Majid. When we want to drum up a crowd in the great city of Glasgow, then you send for Abdul Majid, because he's respected across the communities of Glasgow and he's done business with just about all of them. Today, we're not sending for Abdul Majid. We're asking Abdul to come up to this platform and accept honorary membership of the Alba Party.
Conference, good evening. I would like to thank Alex Salmons and Alba parties for this award. I was been working for independence since 1995 till today. And I promise you all my life, till last breath, I will support the cause of Scottish independence. Because I know that Scotland will be becoming independent soon or later. I believe the dream shall never die. Thank you.
Laughing at? Not following instructions again, was he? We are going to dim the lights before we introduce the wonderful Kenny McCaskill, because I'd like you to see some of the things he's been doing in Parliament for us. Please watch this video.
97% of Scotland's domestic electricity supply is provided by renewables, and yet we are paying sky-high prices dependent upon foreign gas prices. That is perverse, especially when, as it is said by others, Scotland is self-sufficient in gas. And yet we have an incoming Prime Minister in 2022 who's talking about ruling out strikes, who's talking about attacking the fundamental rights of workers to organise. We're going back not to the 1930s, but to the 1830s under this new administration. The pound will tank, inflation will rise, and unemployment will escalate. And what he is doing is taking from the poor and giving to the rich, giving to this generation and impoverishing the young and future generations. That's why Scotland demands its referendum. We want the opportunity to continue to build a better and fairer society. Craig Murray spent 6 months, or almost, in a Scottish prison. He did so for a reporting offence, which others who did similarly were not punished for or even brought before the court. The first great energy revolution of oil and gas saw Scottish communities largely miss out. The offshore renewables revolution is occurring off East Lothian's coast and landing on its shores, to largely then be cabled south. Where's the jobs or benefits for the county? Will the Minister agree to meet with me and representatives of East Lothian Council to ensure that the offshore renewables revolution benefits the communities where it actually lands? In-work poverty undermines the whole social contract that evolved in this country after World War II with the establishment of the welfare state. The poorest in this country currently pay the highest fuel costs through prepayment meters that have higher standing charges and higher tariffs. Is it not time that we provided a social tariff and ended the injustice of prepayment meters?
Yeah. And they shut up and get out! Neil Hamby, I am now naming you and Kenny McCaskill to leave this chamber. Sergeant, deal with them. Deal with them.
Kenny, Neil, you were just kicked out. What are you doing?
Well, it's a democratic outrage. We have a mandate for a referendum in Scotland. This is a Prime Minister who's distorting parliamentary democracy, who is denying Scotland its legitimate right to a referendum. And at the same time, we face that Scotland is an energy-rich country and over half our people are going to be facing fuel poverty. It's time Scotland had the right to determine its own future, rather than having a future determined by a handful of Tory MPs and then by a handful of Tory members, none of whom have been elected in Scotland, and indeed no Tory Prime Minister has been elected in Scotland in my lifetime.
Did you see the face of that Tory minister? What's he saying now? And the Speaker of the House, every time I watch it, I say he's a goner. He's definitely a goner. That blood pressure must be going right off the... How could you do that to that poor man? Now, I've known Kenny all my life, as they say. Like any great friendship, we've had our ups and we've had our downs. Well, we've certainly had more ups and downs, and the ultimate thing is this. I can think of no finer Member of Parliament than Kenny McCaskill. I can think of no finer Justice Secretary than Kenny McCaskill. And I can think of no finer steadfast friend than Kenny McCaskill. When the great Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier were huge friends and occasional opponents. And they had these epic battles in the ring, but were steadfast friends for most of their lives. But the press, of course, painted it up that Fraser and Ali didn't speak to each other. And Joe Frazier died in 2011. And the press in America went to Muhammad Ali's office and said, what has the man got to say about the death of his great enemy, Joe Frazier? And what Ali said was this. He said, when God's trump sound and the last battle was joined, the man I want by my side is smoking Joe Frazier. When I'm in that position, the man I want by my side is Kenny McCaskill.
Delegates, I'm staying the night in the hotel up above, which used to be the high school. My father went there as he grew up in Frost, a wee village beyond Falun, and then in the lee of Polmace Colliery. He was dux. You had to be if you were a working-class laddie and hoping to go to university. But it was an auspicious year, 1939. No sooner had he gone than he was off to war. He became an officer in the artillery. He fought in a war against fascism, for a better society, and so that none of his children would have to go to war, as both he and his father before him had. I recall when he died, receiving a kind note from someone who had served with him and later worked alongside him. It told how my father had been the only officer in his unit who had celebrated the Labour victory in 1945. The others were astonished and some outraged. I tell that tale as, for some of us, detesting the Tories, the values that the philosophy espouses, not the individuals, as people are people the world o'er and capable of good or ill, but those values, and that detestation isn't just lifelong. You're reared that way. It's in your heart and in your soul. Equality, opportunity, peace are universal values passed down through generations. My father came to realise that independence was likewise part of them and essential to achieving them. Friends, they are the values of our party. This address is an opportunity for me to look back over the year past and forward to that coming. The highlight, of course, was being ejected from Parliament. I had anxious emails. Anxious emails from Lord Premsika, a gem of a guy, and the young radical journalists at Declassified UK, all worrying if I was okay. I replied, as an old Polish friend of mine used to say about his work, the best fun you can have with your clothes on. Friends, we are not elected to administer the British state, but it's a platform that we can use to promote our cause. Settling up, not settling down, mustn't be a mantra trundled out but never delivered. I don't intend to focus much on what we've discussed earlier today. We've had a good kick at the ball with that, though a few marks are required. The Supreme Court scam perpetrated by the First Minister, with her accomplice the Lord Advocate, but the victims being Scotland and her people, seeming to do something when in reality not only paltry but positively counterproductive, driven by coming to the end of the road that she'd been kicking the can down for years now. We'll see what their lordships decide, but the great victory claimed by the SNP in lodging written submissions was undermined by the oral submissions of their own law officer. I struggle to think of a political or legal situation where such self-harm has been rendered by a leader to their cause, or such inept pleading provided by a lawyer for their client. But what's done is done. What's required when the judgment is issued isn't some quiet reflection while you consider future career opportunities. That's an option for those in a privileged position, but denied those suffering from the harm being wreaked by a Prime Minister unelected by the Scottish people and a party rejected by them since before even I was born. Quiet reflection isn't a strategy to drive on our cause and provide the economy and society our people need and deserve. It's an abrogation of leadership and a council of despair. Delegates, action, not reflection, is what is required. To oppose austerity being imposed on our people and to deliver our nation's independence. We are, and we have the leader to do that. In the somewhat unlikely event that their lordships say it's game on, then it must be full steam ahead for the referendum, even if little planning or preparation has shamefully been done by the Scottish Government. When ministers don't know the pension situation for an independent Scotland, where there's no plan for borders and the currency plans were woeful before COVID and are now shown to be totally inadequate, that's not just appalling, but an indictment of supposed leaders who have failed to use repeated mandates entrusted to them, yet failed to even use the time that's been allowed to pass productively. Thank goodness, though, there's the wee Alba book, and policy officers are being recruited by our party to do the necessary and vital spadework. It could and should have been done by others, but it's fallen to us to complete. But do it we will, just as we win out we shall. But if there is to be a referendum, or even if there isn't to be, then the ground rules for future campaigning need to change. That's not a diktat or a code of conduct from the self-appointed and supposedly unca good. That's rank hypocrisy from those who have trashed and traduced others, yet masquerade as the arbiters of truth and righteousness. Given events, even at their own most recent conference, they should get their own house in order before lecturing others. As in 2014, it is the grassroots who must lead, as this government most certainly hasn't. It must be the rank and file, not a cadre of elected representatives and their staffers who have been shamefully immobile, preferring to preserve their own positions than to resolve the tragic plight of their country. No party, even ours, is the sole voice of a nation, and nor can they dictate the nature of the campaign for independence. They won't be allowed to, any more than a vacuum will be allowed to develop where there should be activity. In the likely event of a rejection by the Supreme Court, then we cannot allow heads to go down or a myth to perpetuate that it's all over. That is the real danger, and where a cost of living crisis, compounded by no obvious constitutional escape route being articulated, could see many abandon hope in politics entirely. Delegates, we cannot and must not allow that to happen. The social and economic devastation of the Thatcher years will be like nothing if Truss is allowed to proceed, and we cannot depart from this insanity. Truss and her acolytes are zealots. As Johnson saw the country as his fiefdom to do as he wished in, she sees it as a human laboratory to test her experiment in free market economics. That proved a disaster in Pinochet's Chile, and after only a few weeks, it's crashing the economy in the UK. She appears doomed. But then, those of us who lived through the early 1980s and recall the factories shutting, unemployment rocketing, and social ills and human misery increasing, also remember how it seemed inconceivable that Thatcher or her ilk could be re-elected. But along came a war, and back they came. Oh, but we're at peace, you might say. Well, a war is being waged in Ukraine by Ukrainians, but armed and provided for by NATO and the UK. We've no money to provide for the poor, but billions for weaponry, and that's even before Trident. A recent parliamentary question I asked about how many UK soldiers were in Ukraine drew a refusal to answer for security reasons. Why? They were happy to answer only a few months back when numbers stood at 71. Why not now? When I asked about US troops based in the UK, they were happy to confirm 14,000, more than the Scottish Regiment, and almost all in the Air Force. Now they're doing nuclear drills. Friends, I was a toddler at the time of the Cuban crisis and unaware. But I'm an adult now, and this is as dangerous, if not worse. As the analysts say, step on the nuclear escalator, and it's hard, if not impossible, to get off. The Dr. Strangeloves and the military analysts have done scenario planning, gaming, as they call it. There's no good outcome, and much that leads to Armageddon. A phrase recently used by President Biden himself when talking about tactical nuclear use. Maybe, with his finger on the nuclear trigger, he could pay heed to Pope Francis, a voice of sanity and decency amidst the belligerency and bombast and push for peace. It must be achieved. It's not about accepting Russian aggression, but seeking diplomacy, not war. That route must be taken for humanity. The modern independence movement and the nuclear disarmament movement arose at the same time. Many were stalwarts in both. Many still are. Unilateralism ran through the SNP like lettering through a stick of rock. Even old comrades who I'd considered considerably to the right of me were unwavering in their commitment to unilateralism and a Scotland that both lived at peace and promoted it. But no more. New SNP has changed its skin on many of their old principles, but the most flagrant and shameful sellout is on unilateralism and peace. In Westminster, rather than calling for peace, they're cheering on belligerency and fanning the flames of war, competing with the Tories to demand higher GDP contributions for defence, all while social services collapse and international aid is slashed. Pakistan has seen a third of its land flooded, but a tiny fraction in aid of what has been given in weapons to Ukraine. Weasel words and ambiguous positioning on unilateral disarmament leaves our nation threatened by what we live with on the banks of the Holy Loch and on the edge of our largest urban conurbation. Let us tell SNP spokespeople, unilateralism remains at the heart of the movement, and this party and their posturing and equivocation are summarily rejected. But I digress and hope that none of that horror comes to pass. Trust me, will be replaced, not just our Chancellor, who she ditched as she did her own republicanism and Remain convictions. No greater love as a Tory than to lay down their friends for their career. This is a government that is taking from the poor and giving to the rich, borrowing for today and leaving all our tomorrows to be paid for by generations to come. The economic policy is failing. The economy and the social policy being laid out are positively repressive and malevolently cruel. None of that will end, even if her position changes. Nor would it end if she's supplanted in a Palace of Westminster coup. Whichever Tory replaces her would continue with opposed austerity, further impoverishing the poorest, whilst widening the net to include in misery those struggling to pay their mortgage and who once considered themselves reasonably prosperous. Repression through the criminal law will intensify, as will attacks upon trade unions and workers' rights, all as international aid is slashed, military spending will mount. They're a failed government, with, as the FT wrote, a Prime Minister with the shelf life of a lettuce. They deserve to be gone, and the country needs them to be gone. But Labour is no salvation now any more than it has been throughout my life. They offer no radical change, simply mitigating the worst aspects and accepting the further ideological shift to the right which they've adopted. The SNP claim that Labour will just be a return to Tony Blair. That would be bad enough, but it won't even be that. As with the trajectory of the Tories, so with Labour under Starmer. The austerity imposed by the Tories is to be accepted. The attacks on the trade unions will be less strident, but largely go unchallenged. Alba MPs have been proud to stand on the picket lines, but it's a sacking offence for Labour spokespeople, and SNP MPs have been almost invisible. Labour policies on immigration and free movement that Blair would have considered absurd or even repugnant will be meekly rebranded from the Tories, but continued. And the threat to world peace will continue, along with the palp about reform of the House of Lords or further devolution to the most powerful devolved parliament in the world. What a fairy story, but Grandpa Brune still trundles it out. Friends, it need not be this way. Scotland's plight is neither God-given nor imposed by environmental disaster. The fact that a country bestowed with so much should so underperform for its people is a matter of national shame. From centuries' emigration, sometimes forced by violence, more often chosen through circumstance in the search for employment, denied in their native land. The de-skilling of our workforce, the stripping of Indigenous business and the plundering of our natural assets, that's been part of our history. But it must be part of our past. There is a way out of this mess, and Alba must drive it, just as our nation must seize it. Meek exception of an undeniable wrong, supine toleration of flagrant injustice, passive acquiescence of scorn and contempt, they must cease. It need not be this way, and it must not be this way. That energy-rich Scotland should see its people fuel-poor is perverse. Our oil and gas that were worthless, if not an impediment in 2014, are now to be exploited at an unprecedented rate, irrespective of the damage to the environment. Extraction there should be, but at a rate to allow for a just transition and to provide for our needs, not endanger the planet. It's not only a windfall tax that should be falling on the oil giants, but a stake in ownership. Friends, it's Scotland's oil was a slogan in the 1970s, but it's also appropriate in the 2020s. Scotland demands access to its natural resources. Not just the first bounty we were blessed with, but the second. Few nations on earth have been so blessed. Renewables should be transforming our society, providing cheap energy and creating business, wealth and employment. But instead, we have the perversity that while Scottish electricity is almost 100% supplied by renewables, Scots can't afford to heat their homes, though they can see the turbines off their shores or on their hills. Westminster is stealing our renewable energy as much as it stole our oil. Cables running from East Lothian and Aberdeenshire, taking the bounty directly south. The Berwick Bank fields situated between East Lothian and Fife, seeing 40% sent straight to Northumberland. Not even a bawbee for the Crown estate, let alone income for the Scottish Government or fuel-poor Scots. Turbines that should see not just bifab and Arnish, hammering and riveting, but every estuary in Scotland, shamefully being constructed south of the border or abroad. A mark of shame on the Scottish Government, who have allowed skilled work and vital jobs in this sector to be removed. Those jobs, along with those of shipbuilding for the ferries our remote communities so badly require. Delegates, we expect to be done down by the Tories in Westminster, but we have a right to expect better from the SNP and their Green allies. Their incompetence has been staggering. The lack of vision beggars belief. Capping the auction price of our offshore wind, worsened by claiming a huge success for the $700 million brought in, but ignoring that New York received $4.3 million for just 1/4 of what they sold off, allowing our assets to be stripped and failing to push for payment and the jobs that should go with it. The Scottish people have a right to expect better. We know the Tories care nothing, and that it's a union at the heart of our crisis. But it's not an election we need, but a push for independence. This farce must end. It's time to say enough is enough. It's why we need to take our message out to our people. We need to hit doors as much as keyboards, be in streets as well as in civic squares. It won't be easy, and the challenges will be many, but we fight for a cause that has been passed down through the generations. We join with others within our party and without for the cause of Scotland and for a better, fairer and peaceful country and world. As past generations have done, we must deliver. Friends, it's a long road we're on, but the distance is shrinking and our pace is increasing. Onwards. Thank you.
Delegates, we now move to our closing and very special session, which, as I alluded to earlier, is a tribute to the late Ian Hamilton KC. And we're delighted that we have Andrew Neil MacLeod, the author, who's written a book called The Throne of Destiny, here to discuss the same with Alex. As Andrew's making his way to the stage, and we'll rearrange the seating to be more informal as we did earlier, I'd like to invite Elaine Mitchell, who's now just recovering from a rib injury, to play in tribute to Ian Hamilton KC, for who we have some slides. Flower of Scotland. So delegates, if you just bear with us for 5 minutes while we rearrange the seating in front of the stage, and we pin mic up Andrew Neil MacLeod and Mr Salmond. Andrew, come and join us.